We'll call to order the Finance and Improvements Committee for January. We have 15 items on our agenda. I've been asked to pull items 12 and 13. Alderman Lehner.
Mr. Chairman, I would move consent on the remaining items.
Second.
We got a second by Olson.
Can we pull 7?
Okay, pull 7. The motion is to approve items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 14, and 15 with the recommendation as set forth by city staff. If there's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak to any of those items, we can pull them for discussion. Seeing no one. We have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Lehner?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Withers?
Yes.
Pankow?
Yes.
Hedberg?
Yes.
Motion carried. Item 7 is the amendment to the 2016 budget for the Armory floor replacement. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Lehner, second by Hedberg. Discussion. Alderman Sitma.
Thank you, Chairman. I think maybe just to have Mr. Collins come up and discuss this just a little bit, seeing as looking through the notes, I realize we're caught between a rock and a hard spot on this one, but seeing as paying for a floor twice, maybe you could just walk through a little bit of the problems that we've had and why we're here today discussing it again.
Better. The seams began coming apart, so the company came back in, tore the floor back out, reinstalled it again that fall. We were going through the process of the school moving into the auditorium at that time. When they came in the fall to put the floor back in, they had the same product defects. So they basically laid it in there so we could use it for the school year. They came back the following spring, tore it out again, and reinstalled it. About 2 months later, we started noticing bubbles or pop-ups coming up all over the place. Of course, we have a 10-year warranty on the floor. However, after doing core samples and sending it off to a petrographic engineer, it basically came back that says the rocks or the siltstone or the granite and pyrite that was used in the quarry back in the 50s is causing the chemical reaction with the glue, and it was pulling up all the actual concrete underneath. At that time, basically what happened is the company kind of backed off and said it's something that we could never have known that was going to happen. However, our city attorney sent a letter saying we want a new floor, we want a replacement floor. They came back again saying that something that there's no way we'd have known about. We had a conference call with the petrographic engineer, hoping that we could get some kind of thoughts from him as to what we could do in the future if we have a case, or if we don't have a case, if this was going to go to court, or if it wasn't going to go to court. And he basically said to us, "There's no way of knowing that this would have happened." We did a initial moisture test that came back positive or negative, I should say. So basically, if you look up at the screen here, what we have is some these are the bubble outs, pop outs right here. That's just small sections. The blue section right here is basically where they had to come in and cut sections of the floor out to find out if there was moisture coming up or what was underneath. And basically, this is what it left us with. We've got the 2 core samples that are taken out throughout the course of the two spots on the floor. So we got a brand new floor that we've used for 4 years that's been nothing but problems. And besides the aesthetics of it, it's becoming a liability for the city.
Just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, just for informational purposes on this too, kind of tell us a little bit about who all uses this floor and for what kind of purposes and that.
Yeah, this floor is used every night during the school year for youth basketball, youth volleyball, adult basketball, adult volleyball. We use it for the fun zone during the day. We use it for, it's the floor if you have an auction or a wedding or a party or anything in there. It's the floor that you use. We don't cover it. It's a multi-purpose floor. When you have an auction, we've had, you can drive on this type of floor. There are some things with this new floor that we would put in that we would maybe have to regulate as far as driving on it. Well, that will not be an option anymore. We'll just have to see how it wears. Normally, we do our main arena floor, our wood floor that we put in, every 3 years we have to refinish it. So that's kind of what the process we're looking at right now. If it needs to be done more, we will. So there are a couple things that we probably won't be able to hold as, I guess, as easily as we do right now. I don't foresee us losing anything right now. But, as far as our athletic events, all of our youth and adult activities, this will be a good floor. It's the same type of floor, if you are familiar with it, is what Minot Ryan put in their activity center is what it'll look like, if you're familiar with that. They basically went in and put that same floor in over the same type of flooring that we have over here. And that's where we're at, I guess.
Alderman Hedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you say we'd go right over the top of that current?
Yes. That was one of the questions. When I wrote my memo, there were some questions in their what they would do for us, and one of the questions was that you have to put it on concrete, prepare the concrete, and what we were told after asking the question is that floor will remain. They'll come in and they'll put a foam barrier over the top of the floor that'll float those bubble ups, and they'll come in and put 2 pieces of plywood on, and then they'll put the maple flooring on top of that. There'll be a raise. It'll be about a 2.25-inch raise, so there'll be some transition areas coming and going out of doorways and such, but similar to what Minot Ryan has and what they actually have at the Dome over there.
Alderman Hedberg.
So they don't think, even if one of those bubble ups, because I think it rests on those pads, if it hits one of those pads, it's not going to affect the wood floor.
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Hedberg, I actually asked that question because I was concerned about that too. The padding, there's 2 types of systems. One is with the stanchions that you're talking about putting in individually across the floor. The other one is what we are going to use here is an actual pad that it spans the entire floor. It's thick enough, and they say it's soft enough to where that will take up the stand or the pop outs.
Okay.
Other questions for our Recreation Director? Thank you, sir. Other comments from the committee? We have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Laner,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Withers,
Yes.
Panko,
Yes.
Hedberg.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item 12 is the review of an engineer's report for Storm Sewer District number 122. And there's a list of 7 recommendations from our city engineer's office. I need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion by Laner, second by Withus. Discussion? Discussion. Does anyone in the audience wish to speak to this item?
Ernie Medallan, 912 18th Avenue Southwest. Chairman Franzvog and committee, with your permission, I'd like to review some of the information given to us at the open house meeting on this project before Christmas. Based on the letter that came out, it said the engineering team will explain the project, show the proposed improvements, explain the assessment process, and answer any questions you may have. I think that based on that meeting, this project may need some further study based on the questions, answers, and non-answers at that meeting. Evidently, this project has been on some list for many years, and based on the meeting there have been no studies or review of the project, except that it was moved up on the list. And it deals with the pooling, or some cases called flooding. I think pooling is a better term, of the water at the end of 18th Avenue. But there have been many other things done in that area over the years which may or may not have had an effect on this amount of water pooling. And I'd like to discuss with you some of the questions that were raised at the meeting and also the responses. One of the questions was, why is this project coming up now, and what prompted it after this many years? The answer was, it's been on a list for many years, and a committee of the council moved it to the top of the list this year. Another question, have there been any recent complaints or damage from pooling in this area? The response was, don't know of any problems or complaints. Question, what about over the years? I have no records of any complaints, and I don't know of any records or complaints. Another question, has there been any recent review of the project in terms of projects completed over the years? For example, the work that was done on the end of 18th Avenue where there was a larger pipe or drain pipe put in. There was also that the project where the flooding or pooling on Broadway in front of Jim Ryan Chevrolet, and the drain pipe was put in for the puppy dog coulee. So those were a couple of things that have been done evidently during the time this was on the list. There was no response to that as to whether anything had been checked on that. Another question, are there any reports on property damages to businesses or personal property in this area? The response was none known. Also, it should be added that from the audience at that meeting, someone noted that Jim Ryan had water on their parking lot a couple of times over the years, and they had to move some vehicles. But it was also noted that this is a very low area in the street, and normally this water pools and drains out within an hour or two. So then the question was asked, what is the gain from this project relative to the pooling of water on the end of 18th Avenue? The answer, the hope that it would reduce the water pooling level from 1 foot to maybe an inch. But this would depend on the amount of rain and duration of the event. There is no guarantee that there would never be a buildup or pooling of water on that location, because it all depends on the amount of rain, how fast it comes, and duration of the event. The pooling presently does drain out in about an hour or two. Another question, what about the assessment that was done to alleviate the flooding on Broadway? In other words, in front of Jim Ryan, which was also to aid 18th Avenue problem. I think it was referred to as the puppy dog coulee drain. There was no response or information given on that. Then someone asked, well, what is the rationale? Why is this being done? And the responses were, it had been on a list for many years, and a committee moved it up to be done at this time. Then a second rationale would be to cut down on the pooling at the end of 18th Avenue and the pooling at some intersections to the west of 18th. They could then eliminate the drainage dips in the street. From a personal standpoint, I live on 18th Avenue, and I don't have any problem with those drainage dips. In fact, I kind of think they're a good thing, because I think that many motorists think that when they get out on that nice, wide 18th Avenue street, they think they're on the Indianapolis Speedway. And I hate to think of what it would be if they're in a school zone without some of those dips there. Then also another rationale was to keep 18th Avenue open for emergency vehicles. And again, to me, this does not seem that necessary with 16th Avenue, 2 blocks to the north, right up on the hill at a stoplight. And it's also 16th Avenue is designated as the emergency or snow route. So that will get you into that area anyplace. So to me, that didn't seem like a very valid response. Also, I noticed in the report that you were given, the yellow report there, it says the purpose of it is to install a storm system capable of conveying a minor storm event. A minor storm event. So we're looking at spending $2.8 million to take care of a minor storm event. Taxes and special assessments are always a concern for taxpayers. The estimate was $2,000 per lot, which could be more, could be less, depending on final bids. But it's also still in the development stage as far as the process. Please keep in mind that the property owners in this project area are also paying their part in the City Storm Sewer Development Fund, which is paying the other half of the project. And they're also paying the assessment which the school district will have to put on to pay their assessment for that sizable piece of land which the school district has where Edison School is located. To me, it does not seem unreasonable that the property owners, in requesting that information and answers to those questions, couldn't have gotten more of that. It seems to me that it was made to appear that this is the only way, the best way to spend $2.8 billion and so on, and I don't feel anyone of the taxpayers there should be passed off as a troublemaker or a complainer or an alligator just because they asked questions like this at a meeting where they were told that they would be able to get answers to questions like that. I would suggest deferring this for some study, and I don't mean hiring an outside firm or going to a big lengthy type of thing there. I would think that the city must have engineers and people on staff that could take a look at some of these things and provide these answers in a timely manner. But I think that it should be done, and I think that it should be looked at in terms of, what may be done differently to spend this money. I think we need to be sure that this is the best way, the only way, and the most feasible way to spend tax money. And by coincidence, I wrote these notes a few days ago, but I listened to Governor Bergram today, and he talked all about doing things better, cutting down on spending, and so on. And seems to me this would be an excellent opportunity for Minot to be a leader in doing that, in looking at this project, and rather than just going ahead and spending $2.8 million for a project to correct minor flooding. I guess with that, I would thank you very much for your time, and I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Medallen? Alderman Laner, sorry.
Ernie, you live, I know where you live, and I travel 18th an awful lot, and I guess I was always kind of under the impression, and I suppose Lance will correct me if I'm wrong, that when we did the work in front of Jim Ryan Chevrolet on Broadway, I don't know how many years ago that was, but that seemed to pretty much, I thought, took care of most of the problems we had on the north side of Ryan Chevrolet on 18th. I guess I don't know, I don't recall, or obviously the pooling wasn't enough to give me consternation because I drive that once or twice a day. I get more consternation with pooling on Hiawatha, than I do on 18th Avenue. So has there been any, and I think most of the businesses in the area where the pooling was, once in a while there's pooling at 6th Street at the corner of Edison School, if there's a lot of rain or ice melt or snow melt, which I'm sure we're going to have some down the road, but most of the properties, I think, that are affected by the pooling, if I'm not mistaken, wouldn't it be Ryan Chevrolet, and then to the north would be that apartment complex, and then there's a mini strip mall there. Have any of those places, maybe you don't know this, but Lance might, or Dan, have they ever complained about the pooling? Have we ever flooded anybody there?
That question was asked at the meeting, and they had no record of any complaints. It'd be Murphy Motors on the north side, and then Jim Ryan on the south side would be the two businesses in that strip mall where the old bus depot is back a little further. But the things that you mentioned, that's the things that I was saying, were these looked at in terms of how they may have affected it? And that was part of our question that did not receive any answer.
Yeah. Other questions for Mr. Medallen? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Others that wish to speak to this?
Carl Schaller. I live at 911 18th Avenue Southwest, right across from Mr. Medallen. Chairman Francois and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me just to say a couple of words. I think that Mr. Medallen pretty much covered it all. I would just like to say that I've lived at that address since January of '96 and have never experienced any flooding whatsoever. People that were at that engineers meeting, everybody there had said they've never had any flooding contributed by this storm sewer project, what that was supposed to alleviate. So, and that is designated. Well, people have said that one of the things that was brought up to that meeting was that emergency vehicles might have a hard time getting through there. to piggyback on what Mr. McDowell said, that there's never been flooding on that street that would have kept any type of emergency vehicle go through, whether it was a large fire truck or an ambulance. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents worth in on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for Carl? Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Oh.
Brecky.
Chairman Franzwag, my name is Dwayne Brecky. I live at 1608 9th Street Southwest. When I moved to Minot in 1965, I bought a house at 407 18th Avenue, which be the closest house to the area where there was some pooling north of, Ryan Chevrolet. Lived there for 8 years, and I never saw a need. There was occasional, and we had heavy rains. Occasionally, someone foolishly would drive in there, and within an hour or two after the rain had subsided and the water had dissipated, they were out of there. I just don't understand why we've got to spend $2.8 million for something that I don't believe is necessary. That's just what I want to say.
Thank you, Mr. Brecky.
Any questions?
Before we hear from our city engineer, does anyone else wish to speak?
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Sherman. I live at 1818 8th Street Southwest. I sent the council members a letter, I suppose a few weeks back. And today I pulled the engineer's report off of the city website, and it appears that the project is unchanged from what it was presented to us at the public information meeting. And I haven't heard back from the city on the request that I had in my letter to study perhaps a less costly option that I believe might do the same thing that their project is. I lived in this area for 19 years, and as the other gentleman that spoke discussed, I don't recall any significant events that I would say justify a project. But if the project is going to move forward, I would request that the city actually study a less costly option. And so I'll just thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Anyone else wish to speak before we hear from our city engineer? Mr. Meyer. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Daniel Lane. I live at 615 18th Avenue Southwest. I've lived at that address for more than 35 years. I'm a bit of a weather bug, and I remember only one time seeing a pickup stalled on 18th Avenue. But it was someone that was driving very, very rapidly instead of proceeding slowly through the pooled water, and splashed enough water up to get their engine stalled out. But I have stood and watched many, many storms come and go, and have never seen a stalled vehicle other than that one time.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Mr. Meyer. I'll let you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the project, and we've got some questions for you.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. When we put these projects together and we have these open house meetings, you never quite know how into the weeds you want to get on your information. We have all this information, and of course, when we put these projects together, these are all modeled and whatnot. We don't just make a guess and throw a number at it. But trying to pull up all my information. Basically, this project, along with several others, are programmed every few years by the Storm Sewer Ad Hoc Committee of the City Council. A number of years ago, probably in the early 2000s, the city developed a storm sewer utility. And in part of that utility, there's a maintenance component and then a development component of everyone's monthly utility bill. And the theory behind that fee was to address some of these areas around the city that have repetitive flooding. So, for instance, 21st Avenue Northwest was one that we've done in the last few years. Downtown is on the list. The puppy dog improvements over by the mall are on the list. Just down the street from this, 12th Street Southwest by the old Fisher Motors, that was done by this same program. And so the thought by council was at that time that, the storm sewer should have been put in back in the 50s and 60s when these areas were developed. It wasn't done. And so there has to be a balance or a cost effectiveness to some of these improvements. And that's why half of these costs are special assessed, and then the other half is paid for by this development fund. So this has been a city council program for over 10 years now. And so that little background about how we prioritize these. We send the city council's ad hoc committee a recommendation based on several factors. So property damage, the classification of the roadway, other factors such as, if it's causing a lot of street damage or whatnot. So we'll prioritize these projects. We'll send that list up to the city council. They vote on it. And then what we do is we program those projects in the city's capital improvements plan, which is what we've done here. And this 18th Avenue has been on the list for many years, and it just moves its way up. And once we get to the point where we're at now, we'll consult an engineer, Ackerman Esfold in this case, and they go through an extensive modeling exercise on this to make sure that the pipes that we're sizing, the inlet locations, then of course the downstream effects are all modeled and quantified. What we don't want to do in this situation is install a bunch of catch basins and then we create another problem downstream. So we've looked into that, and we're okay. We've also taken into account the improvements that were done on South Broadway when that was reconstructed. There's a 60-inch pipe that was connected to this system. When the DOT sizes pipes, they size it for their roadway. And that SAG location that had some flooding by Jim Ryan was on the DOT's roadway. So those pipes were sized to handle that problem, but not the local drainage issue that we're talking about here. Just to answer Mr. Madollin's some of his questions, when we look at or take complaints from the public on some of these things, we don't necessarily have a log where we write down everyone that's called and the exact situation. But what we do, for instance, Public Works says, well, in the last couple of years we've taken some calls from Murphy Motors and they said, hey, we're having a lot of water in our parking lot. Or the same from Jim Ryan. Or I talked to a gentleman after the meeting and he said, I didn't want to say anything, but he goes, what happens is when we have these street flooding events is we don't get any water through window wells or anything like that, but there's so much pressure on the sewer system that we get clean water that comes up through the floor drains. And so we have some of those issues that are happening throughout the district in these low points. And so what we're trying to do with these improvements, and you can kind of see them here, we're starting here at Broadway and we're running a trunk pipe all the way over to 9th Street. And then we set these catch basins at these intersections. And we're picking up this water into the upstream of the watershed before it comes down to create a problem down here at 4th, 5th, and then we call it the low point here right in front of Jim Ryan on 18th. And so the question is, well, how much improvement are we seeing? Or is this actually doing anything for the money? On this spreadsheet here, I wanted to show you some of the improvements that we're actually seeing. We classify storms based on their probability of happening. So, a once in 1 year or up to the one chance in 100 years of happening. Most storm sewers are sized for a 2-year storm frequency event. So when we say minor storm means your 2-year, your 5-year events. It's not practical to design storm sewer systems for your your lower frequency events like your 25-year or your 100-year event, just because of the cost involved in something like that. So when we back this down and we look at improvements to handle these typical storms on your 1 year and your 2 year, and we look at what are we gaining on your So this is the low point on 18th Avenue by Jim Ryan. With the existing piping that we have in the ground today, on a 1-year storm at the gutter line, your average depth is 9/10 of a foot. Okay, so about 8 inches or 9 inches. With the improvements, we can get that down to about 2 inches, so about that much. And then we look at duration. So, you know, how long is this? How long is the street flooded? In this case, over a half a foot. Existing is 20 minutes. We can get it down to 0 on your typical everyday rain event. You start looking at these these lower frequency but more intense events, and we see quite a bit of improvement. On a 5-year storm, we're seeing about 2 feet of water standing in the gutter line. So it'll be about 1.5 feet over the top of the gutter. Okay, we can knock that down to about even with the top of the curb on a 5-year event. Your duration of flooding over 2/10 of a foot is over almost 3 hours. Here we get it down to 40 minutes. Your duration over half a foot, so this would be what I would consider a danger to the public. You go from almost an hour to 5 minutes. So you can see as we build this system and we increase that inlet capacity, get that water into a pipe upstream in the watershed before it comes downstream to create the problem. We are having a substantial amount of improvement with this piping arrangement. You come down here and you can see what's happening with these improvements down at like 4th and 5th Street. Take a look at some of these numbers. So what this means when you have on a 10-year event, for instance, for 14 hours you'll have a constant gutter flow. If we don't do any of these intersection regradings or we don't put the storm sewer farther upstream, we can get that flow down to basically down to 48 minutes on a 10-year event where we're having water in the gutter that's about 3 inches deep. And how we're able to accomplish that is by putting those catch basins at each one of those intersections and then what we call matching the crowns. You're creating little pools at the quadrants and the intersections. So it creates almost like little dams. It keeps that water isolated to that catch basin, gets the water in the pipe, and gets it out of the system. Instead of what's happening now is that water will come, work its way down. Right. What's happening is this water, as it works its way down without these catch basins, as it starts to stack higher and higher and higher, and then once it gets down to these lower points down here in 4th and 5th Street, there's so much water in the street that if we would line up a whole bunch of catch basins, it just wouldn't be effective. So that's why we had to extend these pipes all the way up into the watershed to pick that up. So trying to reduce the project, lessening the amount of pipes, but keeping the same amount of inlets, just from a hydraulic standpoint, it's just not going to work. Any other questions you might have?
Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Lainer.
So there is no storm sewer along 18th now? I know there's a number of streets in Minot that don't have any. Is this one of them?
This is one of them. There is storm sewer on 18th. There's a set of catch basins here by Jim Ryan and Murphy Motors is right here. And then it extends a little bit farther to, there's an alley here just before 4th Street. And so I think some of those catch basins, it's a couple of triples. And so basically we have about 9 catch basins on this system. We're going to expand that to about 36.
But there is nothing past to the west of that then?
Correct.
Other questions? Alderman Pinkow?
Lance, how many households are in this watershed district?
About 330.
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, I was unaware of the list of questions. There was several people at the public hearing. They asked the questions. I'd like to see them get answers to those subjects. Lance, is there anything that you would see if we took another month here so that I could sit down with those and converse with you to make sure that they're fully answered to the fullest degree that makes them feel that everything's been answered? Would that cause any delay in the project if it was to move forward?
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Pankow, you know, the longer that we push it out, with the process that we have to go through, the farther into the bidding season that happens. So we would run the risk of contractors filling up and then thus a higher bid price. Not saying that that's guaranteed to happen. We're in a unique position right now where this is really the first pipe project out of the gate for us, for the city. So hopefully we can take advantage of some good bids if this project would move forward. As far as, you know, looking at different options or alternatives, you know, this is basically it. We need a piping arrangement that has enough inlets on it to pick up this water before it becomes a problem. I really don't see a better or an optimized sort of design scheme. You know, and that's one of the reasons why we have these models. We go through an extensive modeling exercise with programs and that kind of thing to make sure that what we're putting forward is going to work and that it's going to do the job.
Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Pankow.
One other question that Mr. Bedalin had mentioned is some of the things that have happened on Broadway and the separate storm sewer to handle that area of water. All of these models have been calculated including all of those additional things that have happened all over the last several years. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have two interconnected pipe systems here. There's an assessment district that was put in back in the early 80s that brought this pipe across Broadway and 18th Avenue and put in the catch basins that are there now. That pipe goes directly to Puppy Dog Coulee. When the DOT redid South Broadway, they tied into a manhole here, and then it's almost like a splitter structure where some of that drainage then will split. It'll come down South Broadway, and then it kind of goes through the Kmart area, and then out by this one is the Home of Economy pipe, and there's a 60-inch storm sewer that dumps out by Home of Economy. And so when we model these things, because they're interconnected, we have to kind of follow those pipes through and make sure that if we add more water to the system, is that going to create any downstream effects? So that was taken into account.
Alderman Lehner.
Assuming the project were to go forward, which who knows if it will or not, I noticed that the pipe is on the south side of 18th Street. 18th Street is fairly wide, so if this project were to proceed, would traffic be shut down on 18th for the whole project? Or would there still be a lane of traffic? Then the other question I have is, if it wouldn't shut traffic down, would it be more advisable to move the pipe to the north side of the road because now you're paralleling Edison Elementary, thereby maybe saving some of the accessibility for the people that live on the south side of 18th?
And Mr. Chairman, Alderman Lehner, the reason that the pipe is on the south side, because on the north side of the road is where our water main's at. And so because of the separation requirements that we have, there's just not enough room to put them both on the north side, so to speak. And so that's why we put it on the south side. With this project, it's not being special assessed, but we're also doing some water main replacement on parts of 18th Avenue. While we have the street closed down, we have a couple sections of cast iron main left to replace. So that would prevent us from keeping that roadway completely open.
Other questions? Alderman Sitma.
For the $2,097 that's being assessed to that, what kind of time frame does that span for that special assessment?
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Sitman, just to clarify, what we do is we break this down in special assessment units. Mm-hmm. And what that means is each one of these calculated units has about somewhere between $2,000 and $2,100 unit cost, depending on what we get for bids. And then we break each lot down by 8,500 square feet. So, for instance, if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, might have 1.2 units. We multiply 1.2 times this 2,000. But what I'm trying to get at is I don't want anybody just to look at and say, well, it's just going to be $2,000. Whatever the cost ends up being, it's spread over a 10-year period.
Other questions? Alderman Lehner.
And then you said there was 335 houses in this, so all of those would be assessed, not just the people on 18th, I assume.
Correct. Anybody that's within the watershed boundary.
Other discussion? Other questions, I should say. Alderman Pankow.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a comment that I guess I understand the world of bidding things out, and that has timing to it, and early in gets better numbers. I can see postponing for 30 days, and will that hamper that? It may, but I'll just say that after this meeting, if we move this forward, I'll meet with the individuals that have their questions and make sure that they're answered before council meeting next Monday.
Other questions for our city engineer? Okay, thank you, Mr. Meyer. Any other discussion? Anyone else wish to speak? Any other discussion? Sir, Mr. Sherman.
After the engineer's discussion, I'd just like to let you know that the $2,000 a lot is on a standard city lot of 8,500 square feet. My lot is roughly 1 3/4 of a city lot. So for me, we're talking about $4,000. And then he had mentioned the clean water and the sewer pipes or floor drains. I would suggest that that is probably people pumping their sump pumps into the sanitary sewers rather than pressure from the storm system or the lack of a storm system. And then I would also request that Mr. Meyer just said that the smaller project just won't work. But I would request that the city actually quantify how it would perform. The models are built. All they have to do is turn off the collectors past the 6th Street intersection and rerun the models, and they can determine what the models would show the water depth reductions would be by just doing the smaller project. And I would request that that be done also. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pankow, I'm sure you'll look into that.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Michelle Van Lith, 1816 7th Street, Southwest. The frustration that I am having with the information that Mr. Meyer is sharing is that it's based on computer-generated information as opposed to the information that you've got from residents who have lived in the neighborhood from 20 to 35 years who are sharing with you that they're not experiencing an inability to drive on the street for an extended period of time. So I think what happened at the meeting that I attended, the previous meeting we had last month, people felt like we're almost creating an issue here where an issue doesn't exist. You don't have the residents of this neighborhood asking for improved water, storm sewer. And I don't believe that it's just because we don't want to pay for it. I believe that it's because the issue is not significant. We didn't have anyone at the meeting stand up and say, yes, please, I'm having issue with the water running back into my driveway or whatever. In fact, I heard people say if there are residents that are struggling with it, I'm willing to pay for it. But there wasn't anyone willing to say that. And so it feels like in an environment where our city is needing to make strong decisions about how we're spending money with related to flood control, that we're creating an expense here that isn't being asked for by the residents or your constituents, and then requiring them to pay for half of the bill. So I would encourage you to go back and review the information to find out if this is something really necessary, because you're asking for a significant expense from the residents of this community, a number of which are retired, and I can't imagine that this wouldn't be a significant expense for them. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Brecky.
I just want to reemphasize, I've lived in that district for 52 years. And I think that's a considerable amount of time. And I don't think it's necessary. I think the program was created and fulfilling a project, but I don't see anywhere that it's needed.
Okay,
Thank you.
Any other discussion amongst the members before we vote? Alderman Lehner.
Take Alderman Hedberg first.
Mr. Chairman,
Alderman Hedberg.
I think it's a solution in search of a problem here. I can't support it. I guess the gentleman that have and the lady that spoke have lived in that area for that many years, and we can go off numbers of a report, but their testimony speaks much louder than those engineering reports to me. So I'm not going to support it this time. I would possibly support re-looking at another solution here, but I can't support this.
Okay. Alderman Laner.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm going to make a motion that we hold this for 1 month, allowing Mr. Pankow time to meet with the citizens involved, possibly looking into an alternate solution, as Mr. Sherman suggested. I believe a storm sewer of some sort is necessary on 18th. I mean, we've had a number of roads throughout the years that when they were built and all of a sudden things mushroomed, storm sewers weren't put in. We've lived to regret it. So I'm going to make a motion that we hold this because I think it's necessary. It might affect the bids, but it might not. So that'll give us 30 days to study this further.
We have a motion to hold it in committee.
Second.
Second by Sitma. Discussion on that motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Alderman Sitma.
just to follow up, I guess, a little bit of what Mr. Hedberg had stated. I do know of some motorists that have had substantial damage just from some of my workings with the insurance industry, and while I can't divulge any kind of real information as far as that damage, I can say some of them were significant, but by no means extensive in the terms of numbers. I do have to agree with Mr. Hedberg that at a time where we're looking at a lot of fiscal tightness within our budgets, that perhaps while I do see long-term need for this, perhaps right now just isn't the time.
Other discussion on the motion? Other discussion on the motion to hold it in committee? Seeing none, call the roll.
Laner?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Withis?
Yes.
Panko?
Yes.
Hedberg?
Yes.
Motion carried, and it sounds like Alderman Pankow will be taking the lead on visiting with those people as well. Thank you for that. Item 13 is the installation of safety features for the utility billing department. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Olson, second by Laner. Discussion. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're probably overdue for this. We've had just recently, because of, how should I say this, discussions and protests over possible different solutions on snow removal, where people have apparently have attacked road graders, crews. Sometimes the calls coming in are less than amiable from those out there. Some of these people, I would suggest, probably don't know the rest of the story, what really happens out there. Many of them, as Mr. Withis and I found out during the post-flood event, don't want to know and don't care to know. They just don't want to know the rest of the story. So I'm in favor of this going in. I think it's probably time we did this.
Okay. Other discussion? Other discussion. Alderman Sitma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, to further that remarks, the issue of privacy was also mentioned in there, and I do believe that is a significant issue as well, not only with names but other billing information. It does represent an issue there that I think that this would resolve.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, or call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Withis?
Yes.
Panko?
Yes.
Hedberg?
Yes.
Laner?
Yes.
Motion carried. With that, that completes our agenda. We're adjourned.